The story you're about to hear is not just about love and luxury. It's about truth, identity, and the courage to love beyond what the world expects. In a world of palaces, private jets, and diamond-covered lies, one man believed he had finally found perfection. Karim al-Zahir, the trillionaire Arab whose empire spanned from Dubai to London, was used to control every number, every deal, every secret. Until he met her, Layla, a woman whose beauty silenced entire rooms and whose laughter melted the ice around his heart. They met at a charity gala in Paris, and within months the world watched as Karim, the most untouchable man in the Middle East, fell to his knees and asked for her hand. The wedding was unlike anything the world had seen. Silk-draped palaces, orchestras flown from Italy, and a bride whose smile outshone the chandeliers. It was the perfect union, or so he thought, because on their honeymoon, somewhere between the scent of the sea and the quiet of their villa in the Maldives, Karim would discover something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about her, and about himself. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this emotional story. What happens when the most powerful man in the world faces a truth that money can't control? Stay with me, because what he does next will surprise you more than anything you've ever heard. Karim al-Zahir had built his empire from nothing but desert sand and relentless ambition. By 40, he owned the tallest towers in Dubai, commanded oil fields across the Arabian Peninsula, and sat at the center of every global negotiation that mattered. Yet for all his wealth, his life felt hollow, an endless cycle of board meetings, private jets, and carefully arranged smiles. He told himself love was a distraction, something that belonged to poets and dreamers, not to men forged by power. That belief lasted until the night he saw her. It was at a charity gala in Paris, an event so extravagant that even the chandeliers seemed to glow with arrogance. Karim had attended out of obligation, standing near the marble staircase with a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, scanning the room for investors and potential allies. But then he noticed her, Layla. She wasn't like the others. While women in glittering gowns floated around the room hoping to catch his gaze, she stood near the back, laughing softly with an older couple. Her dress was elegant but understated, a deep emerald green that contrasted beautifully with her golden skin. Her hair fell in loose waves, and her eyes, they carried a spark that was both confident and kind. Karim found himself walking toward her before he even realized what he was doing. When she turned to face him, her smile caught him off guard. "You're Karim al-Zahir," she said, tilting her head slightly. "The man who supposedly owns half the world," he smirked. "Only half?" She laughed, the sound light and melodic. "Well, I suppose you'll buy the other half soon." Karim felt something he hadn't in years. Curiosity. "And you are?" "Layla Haddad," she said simply. "Art curator, dreamer, and apparently someone who didn't read the guest list carefully enough to realize she'd be standing next to the most intimidating man in the room." "Intimidating?" Karim asked, genuinely amused. "I've been called many things, ruthless, ambitious, even heartless. But intimidating might be the kindest one yet." "Then maybe people just don't look closely enough," she replied, her gaze lingering on him. "You look like someone who's more tired than terrifying." That single sentence hit deeper than he expected. For the rest of the night, Karim found excuses to stay near her. They talked about art, music, the noise of the city. She challenged him, teased him, and never once treated him like a trophy. For the first time in years, he wasn't a billionaire or a headline. He was just a man, listening to a woman who saw beyond the surface. When the evening ended, he offered to walk her out. Paris was draped in soft rain, the kind that made the streets shimmer under the lights. He handed her his coat when she shivered, and she smiled. "You don't seem like the type to do small gestures," she said. "I'm not," he admitted. "You make me forget the big ones." They said goodnight under the awning of the Ritz. But something in that look, that quiet hesitation before they turned away, told Karim that this wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, Karim couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself checking his phone between meetings, wondering if she would message. When she finally did, a simple, "Do men like you ever take a day off?" he smiled for the first time in months. Their conversations grew deeper, Layla had a warmth that disarmed him, and a mystery that drew him in further. She asked questions no one else dared to. Do you ever feel lonely when everyone calls you sir? Or if you lost everything tomorrow, who would you still be? He didn't know how to answer, but he wanted to try. For her. Karim began visiting her in Paris under the guise of business trips. They walked along the Seine, shared quiet dinners in hidden restaurants, and stayed up late talking about everything from philosophy to childhood dreams. Layla never flaunted his wealth, never asked for anything. She made him feel human again. One night, while they stood on her balcony watching the city lights, he said softly, "You make me feel like I'm not alone in this world." She turned to him, her expression tender. "Maybe that's because you aren't." He kissed her then, a slow, deliberate moment that erased all distance between them. It wasn't the kind of passion born from desire alone. It was the kind that came from recognition. Two souls who saw something familiar in each other. By the time spring arrived, Karim had made up his mind. He would marry her. It didn't matter that his advisors warned against it, that the media would explode, or that his family would question everything. For once, Karim didn't care about perception. He only cared about Layla. He proposed in Marrakesh, in the courtyard of a riad filled with jasmine and lanterns. As the evening light turned the sky gold, he knelt and said, "You are the only thing in my life I didn't plan, and the only thing I never want to lose." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was an international event, royal guests, heads of state, and the most extravagant display of wealth imaginable. Yet, in the middle of all that grandeur, Karim only saw her. Layla walked toward him in a white gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of trust. And as he placed the ring on her finger, he thought, for the first time, I am truly rich. The honeymoon began in the Maldives, an island paradise far from the cameras and gossip. Their villa overlooked a turquoise sea, and for a few blissful days it felt like nothing could ever touch them. But as the sun set on their fifth night, Karim noticed something shift in her. Layla grew quiet, distant, as if a storm brewed behind her calm smile. When he reached for her hand, she pulled away gently. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. Karim's chest tightened. "What is it?" She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "You said you wanted to know every part of me. But there's one part you don't. One truth I've been afraid to share." He frowned, his heartbeat growing louder. "Layla, whatever it is, you can tell me." She took a deep breath. "Karim, before I met you, before all of this, I wasn't born as Layla." The words hung in the air like thunder. Karim stared at her, unsure if he had heard correctly, and as the silence stretched between them, the paradise around them suddenly felt like a prison made of glass. Karim stood frozen, the soft hum of the ocean outside their villa suddenly louder than his own heartbeat. The air around him felt heavy, thick, as if every breath carried 1,000 unspoken questions. Layla's eyes shimmered in the candlelight. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered, "I was born as Adam." For a moment, the world seemed to stop moving. Karim blinked, trying to process her words. It was as if the ground beneath him had shifted, and he couldn't find his balance. He had faced hostile takeovers, betrayals, and billion-dollar losses, but never had anything shaken him quite like this. Because this wasn't business. This was the woman he loved. He finally managed to speak, his voice low and uncertain. "You mean—" Before my transition," Layla said gently, her voice cracking but steady enough to hold its truth. "Before I became who I am now. I wanted to tell you from the beginning, but I was terrified. I didn't want this, us, to be built on fear or pity. I wanted you to love me for me." Karim turned away, pacing toward the balcony. The night wind hit his face, cooling the sweat that had started to form along his neck. He stared at the horizon where the moonlight kissed the waves. "You lied to me," he said quietly, not in anger, but in disbelief. Layla's voice trembled. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." He spun around, his eyes dark with confusion and pain. "A difference? Layla, you let me marry you. You stood before God and before the world, and you never told me who you really are." Tears welled in her eyes. "Who I really am? Kareem, I am the same person who made you laugh when you forgot how to. The same woman who stayed up talking to you about the stars and your fears. The same person you held when the world felt too heavy. That hasn't changed. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to see the same woman he had fallen in love with, but his mind was spinning. Images of their wedding, of his family's blessings, of the vows they'd exchanged, all clashed against this new truth. He whispered, "Why now? Why tell me this now?" Layla wiped her tears and looked at him with quiet strength. "Because I couldn't live another day pretending there was a secret between us. I love you too much to lie to you forever." Kareem felt something in him crumble. Her words were raw, honest, and they hit him harder than any confession could. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "To my family, to my culture, to my name?" "I know," she said softly. "That's why I was afraid." He looked up at her, his jaw tight. "You should have trusted me." Layla's voice broke. "And risk losing you before I ever had the chance to show you who I truly am?" "I couldn't. You think you know what love costs, Kareem, but you've never had to pay for being yourself." The words pierced him like a blade. She wasn't shouting, but her pain was louder than any scream. He stood, his reflection flickering in the glass as he spoke. "I need time," Layla nodded, her eyes full of tears she refused to let fall. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, not to convince you, but because I have nowhere else I'd rather be than standing in my truth." That night, Kareem didn't sleep. He sat outside until the first light touched the sea, thinking about every moment that led him to this point. He remembered her laugh, her kindness, the way she listened when no one else did. He remembered how she made him feel human again, something no one in his world of power and pretense had managed. But every time he began to soften, his mind reminded him of the expectations, the traditions, the invisible chains of pride and reputation that ruled his life. At sunrise, Layla walked out onto the balcony. Her eyes were swollen, but she still looked serene, wrapped in one of his white shirts. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. He didn't answer. She sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know. I understand if you can't stay." Kareem turned to look at her, and for the first time since her confession, his anger gave way to something deeper. Sorrow. "You think I can just walk away? That it's that simple?" She met his gaze, her voice calm. "It's not simple, but it's honest, and I'd rather face your truth than your silence." He studied her face, the same eyes that had looked at him with love and vulnerability, the same lips that had whispered his name in the dark. Nothing about her felt false, and yet, he whispered, "I don't know what to feel." "You don't have to know," she replied softly. "You just have to feel." Kareem exhaled slowly. His heart ached with contradiction. He had been raised in a world where identity was fixed, where reputation defined worth, and where deviation was punished by exile, or worse. But in front of him sat a woman who had defied all of that, who had fought to live as herself despite the cost. And he realized something. She was braver than he had ever been. Later that morning, they sat across from each other at breakfast. The silence was heavy but not hostile. Layla pushed her plate aside and said quietly, "If you want an annulment, I'll understand." Kareem looked up slowly. "You think I care about legalities right now?" "I think you care about your image," she said honestly, "and I don't want to destroy that for you." He clenched his fists. "My image is nothing without my integrity. You think I could live with myself if I abandoned you for being honest?" Her breath caught. "So, you're not leaving?" "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, "but I'm not walking away from you." "Not yet." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "That's more than I hoped for." He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. Her fingers were cold, fragile, and yet in that touch, he felt something real. The storm between them hadn't passed, but something had shifted. Kareem realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. He whispered, "You've turned my world upside down, Layla." She smiled weakly. Maybe it needed turning. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, Kareem felt something inside him begin to change. Not acceptance, not yet, but the first fragile step toward understanding. Kareem didn't return to Dubai immediately. He extended their stay in the Maldives without a clear reason, though deep down he knew what he was doing. He wasn't ready to face the world or himself. His heart was still trying to find solid ground after the truth Layla had shared. Every morning he'd wake up before sunrise and walk barefoot across the beach, the salt air filling his lungs. It was the only time he could think clearly. The waves were honest. They didn't care who he was, a trillionaire, a husband, a man questioning everything he thought he knew about love. They just came and went, endlessly, without judgment. Layla, meanwhile, respected his silence. She gave him space, though he could feel her presence everywhere. The faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets, the sound of her soft footsteps across the villa floor, the quiet hum of a woman who refused to hide anymore. He admired that about her, her courage. And that admiration, no matter how conflicted he was, never left him. On the fourth day after her confession, Karim returned from his walk to find Layla sitting on the deck, sketching something in a small leather notebook. She looked peaceful, sunlight kissing her hair. "What are you drawing?" he asked, surprising even himself. She glanced up and smiled gently. "You?" He frowned slightly. "Me?" She turned the book around. On the page was a charcoal sketch of his silhouette, standing alone by the water. The details were hauntingly beautiful, the posture, the tension in his shoulders, the distance in his eyes. "You look like a man who's trying to find something he already has," she said softly. Karim sat beside her. For a moment they didn't speak. Only the waves filled the silence between them. Finally he said, "I've been asking myself what I'm afraid of." "And what did you find?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid of what you are. I'm afraid of what the world will say if I stand beside you." Layla nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that. "Then let the world speak. It's been speaking over me my entire life. I stopped listening a long time ago." Her words lingered in his chest like a spark waiting to catch fire. He looked at her, really looked at her. The curve of her jaw, the determination in her gaze, the quiet strength behind her pain. It struck him then that he wasn't sitting beside a secret or a scandal. He was sitting beside a survivor. That night, Karim hosted a private dinner on the deck. He had the staff set up lanterns and flowers, something intimate but not extravagant. Layla walked out in a flowing white dress, barefoot, her hair loose and glowing under the candlelight. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. When she sat down, he said quietly, "Do you remember when we first met?" She smiled. "At the gala in Paris, you looked bored. I thought you were going to leave before the speeches even began." "I was," he admitted, "until you looked at me like I was more than a name." She looked down shyly. "You were more than a name." He reached for his wine glass but didn't drink. "Do you know what I realized? You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost, my humanity." Layla's eyes softened, but she said nothing. He continued, his tone quieter now. "When I found out the truth, I thought I'd lost something. But now I see I didn't lose anything. I just didn't understand what I'd been given." Tears welled in her eyes. "Karim?" He shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. I'm still learning. I'm still struggling. But I'm not turning my back on you." Layla reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "That's all I need. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to stay." He smiled faintly. "I can promise that. For tonight." The following morning, Karim received a call from his personal assistant in Dubai. The story of his marriage had reached the media. Headlines flashed across social networks. "Arab trillionaire marries mysterious woman in secret ceremony." For now, no one knew about Layla's past. But Karim knew it was only a matter of time. Secrets never stayed buried forever. That evening, as they walked along the shore, he told her, "The world's starting to notice us." Layla sighed. "It was inevitable," he nodded. "Yes, but I want to decide what happens next." "No more running, no more hiding?" She looked at him cautiously. "What are you saying?" "I want to go home, with you. I want you to live in my world, not as a shadow, but as my wife." Her eyes widened, filled with both fear and hope. "Karim, your family." "They'll deal with it," he said firmly. "If they can't, then that's their battle, not mine." Layla's lip trembled. "You don't know what they'll say. You could lose everything." "I already lost myself once," he interrupted. "I won't do it again." For a moment neither spoke. The waves crashed around them, fierce and untamed, like their emotions. Then slowly she took his hand and whispered, "Then we face it together." He smiled. Together. 2 weeks later they returned to Dubai. The city greeted them with glittering skyscrapers and the sharp scent of desert air. Karim's penthouse overlooking the Burj Khalifa felt colder than he remembered. Layla stood by the window, gazing at the skyline. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "and terrifying." He joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You belong here as much as I do." She turned to him, her expression conflicted. "You don't have to prove anything, Karim. If you change your mind, I'll understand." He smiled faintly. "I don't change my mind. I change the world around me." That evening, Karim gathered his family at his villa outside the city. His mother, a regal woman draped in black silk, watched Layla closely as they entered. His brothers exchanged whispers. When they sat for dinner, Karim stood. "This is my wife," he said calmly, "and I expect her to be treated with the same respect you give me." His mother's gaze hardened. "You married her without our blessing." "Yes," he replied evenly, "because love doesn't wait for permission." The table fell silent. Layla reached for his hand under the table, her fingers trembling. Karim squeezed back gently. His brother spoke next, voice cold. "Do you even know who she truly is?" Karim looked directly at him. "Yes, better than I've ever known myself." For a moment no one dared breathe. Then his mother rose, her face unreadable. "If she makes you happy, then may God grant you both peace. But understand this, Karim, you have chosen a harder road." He met her gaze steadily. "I always have." As the night went on, tension filled the room. But something else lingered too. Acceptance. Not complete, not pure, but enough to let them breathe. And for the first time since the Maldives, Karim felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The days following their return to Dubai were heavy with quiet tension. Karim could feel it in the way the servants looked at them, in the sudden hush that fell whenever they entered a room. The world outside their penthouse was buzzing, tabloids speculating, journalists begging for interviews, and whispers in the elite circles of Arabia spreading faster than wildfire. Karim had spent years building an empire based on control, precision, and power. But now, for the first time, his reputation wasn't something he could manage with a calculated move or a well-worded statement. It was being tested by something raw, human, and deeply personal. Layla, though, handled it with grace that surprised him. She didn't hide. Every morning, she walked through the marble halls of their home, head held high, dressed in flowing silks that moved like water around her. She smiled at the staff, tended to the gardens, and pretended not to notice the way people stared. But at night, Karim saw the truth, the sadness behind her calm, the exhaustion behind her quiet strength. One evening he found her sitting alone by the window, looking down at the lights of the city. "They hate me," she whispered, not turning around. Karim's chest tightened. "They don't know you." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "They don't need to. They just need to know what I was." "That's enough for them." He walked closer, standing behind her. "Do you regret telling me?" She turned her head slightly, her eyes glistening. "Never. Even if it means losing everything, I'll never regret being honest with you." Karim knelt beside her chair. "You won't lose me." She reached out, touching his face softly. "You say that now. But love doesn't exist in isolation, Karim. Love is fragile when it's surrounded by judgment." He caught her hand and kissed it. "Then we'll protect it. Both of us." But even as he said it, a part of him wondered how much longer he could fight the world without losing himself. The next morning, Karim received an urgent call from his chief financial officer, Amir. The company's investors were panicking. Rumors had spread that Karim's controversial marriage could destabilize the brand image of the Zahir Group. In the corporate world, morality and image often outweighed truth. "Karim," Amir said over the speakerphone, his tone measured but anxious, "some of our partners are threatening to withdraw. The media is tearing into this story. We need a statement. Something official." Karim stared out the floor-to-ceiling window of his office. "A statement?" he repeated coldly. "You mean a lie? I mean damage control," Amir replied. "You know how this works. The markets react to perception, not fact." Karim clenched his jaw. He had spent his life controlling perception, crafting an image of perfection and strength. But now, that image was being challenged by love, and he wasn't sure which one mattered more. He ended the call abruptly and sat in silence. His reflection in the glass looked foreign to him. A man torn between two worlds, the empire he built and the woman who made him feel alive. When he returned home that evening, Layla was in the courtyard surrounded by roses. Her hands were covered in soil, her dress slightly stained, her hair tied back loosely. He watched her for a moment, something in his chest softening. This, her simplicity, her quiet defiance, was everything his world of luxury lacked. She looked up and smiled faintly. "You're home early." "Not early enough," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. She wiped her hands on her apron. "You've been quiet lately." "I've been thinking," he admitted. "About everything." "About us." Layla's smile faded slightly. "And what have you decided?" He hesitated. "That I don't care what they say. That I won't let the world dictate who I can love." She looked at him carefully, searching for the truth behind his words. "And what about your company? Your investors? Your empire?" "They can all collapse," he said simply. "None of it means anything without you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Don't say that. You've worked your whole life for what you have. Don't throw it away because of me." Karim took her hands in his. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm saving the only thing worth keeping, my humanity." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Layla whispered, "You're the first man who's ever said something like that to me." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm the first man who's meant it." That night a storm rolled over the desert. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the endless dunes. Karim stood on the balcony, the wind whipping through his hair. His phone buzzed again. A message from Amir. "The board is meeting tomorrow. They want you to consider stepping down temporarily, just until the scandal cools." He stared at the screen, then set the phone down on the table. A storm outside, a storm inside. Layla appeared behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Something's wrong," she said softly. He turned to face her. "They want me to step down." She blinked. "From your company?" He nodded. "They think I've become a liability." Layla's lips parted, but no words came. She looked heartbroken, not for herself, but for him. "I can fix it," he said, though his voice sounded hollow. "I always fix things." She shook her head. "You can't fix people's fear. You can't negotiate with hate." He looked down at her, the wind brushing her hair across her face. "Then what do I do, Layla?" She reached up and touched his chest, over his heart. "You stand in truth, even when it costs you everything. Because truth is the only thing that survives." The next morning, Karim attended the emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was tense. The men he had worked with for decades, men who had once bowed to his every word, now looked at him like a scandal waiting to explode. Amir spoke first. "Karim, this isn't personal. It's business. The public doesn't understand." "Then we educate them?" Karim interrupted sharply. "We lead by example, not by fear. Your marriage, my marriage," Karim said firmly, "is my choice. And if my company cannot stand beside that choice, then it doesn't deserve my leadership." The room fell silent. One by one, the men looked away. Karim stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and said calmly, "I built this empire from nothing. I can do it again if I must, but I won't sacrifice the woman who taught me what integrity truly means." He walked out before anyone could respond. Outside, the sun was rising over the desert, fierce, blinding, and free. And for the first time in his life, Karim al-Zahir felt that same kind of freedom burn inside his chest. Karim drove for hours that night, the lights of Dubai fading behind him until all that surrounded him was the desert. The engine's hum became a rhythm to his thoughts, steady, relentless, full of conflict. He had walked out of the boardroom knowing he might never return. For a man like him, who'd spent his life defining himself by power, that decision should have felt like destruction, but strangely, it felt like freedom. By the time dawn broke, he pulled over at a remote overlook that stretched endlessly into the dunes. The sun was rising, painting the world in gold. Karim stepped out of the car and let the dry wind whip across his face. He felt small for the first time in years, not weak, but human. Behind him, the sound of a car approached. He turned, startled, as Layla stepped out of the silver SUV that had followed him. Her hair was tied up, her eyes tired but fierce. "I knew you'd come here," she said softly. He smiled faintly. You shouldn't have followed me. And you shouldn't have left without saying goodbye, she replied. Kareem looked back at the horizon. I needed to think. Layla walked closer until she stood beside him. About what? He hesitated. About what kind of man I want to be. The one the world respects or the one I respect? She nodded slowly. And? He looked down at her, the wind brushing strands of her hair against his face. I'm starting to realize they don't have to be the same man. Layla's lips trembled into a soft smile. That's the man I fell in love with. He stared at her for a moment, something breaking open inside him. You still love me? After all this? Her eyes filled with tears. I never stopped. I just thought maybe you did. He reached out, cupping her face gently. I didn't. I was just lost. Layla leaned into his touch, her voice barely a whisper. Then find your way back. He kissed her forehead, closing his eyes. I already am. They drove back together, the silence between them now full of unspoken understanding. When they returned to Dubai, the world had already begun to react to Kareem's resignation. Social media erupted. Headlines called him everything from a fallen mogul to a man of conviction. Some mocked him. Others admired him, but Kareem no longer cared for either. He spent the next few days at home, detached from the noise. Layla stayed by his side, helping him rediscover what life felt like outside the gilded cage of corporate politics. They cooked together. They took long walks through the desert gardens. Sometimes they said nothing at all, and somehow those silences spoke more than any words could. Yet beneath the calm, there was still tension, an unspoken fear neither wanted to name. Kareem had sacrificed his empire, but the world outside their walls wasn't done judging. One evening, while Kareem was reading by the window, Layla appeared with her phone trembling in her hand. You need to see this, she said quietly. He looked up. On the screen was a video, secretly recorded, uploaded by an anonymous source. It showed Layla from years ago, before her transition, during one of her early hospital visits. The footage was invasive, cruel, and already viral. The comments were vicious. Kareem felt the heat rise in his chest like a flame. Who did this? I don't know, she whispered. But it doesn't matter. It's out there now. He stood abruptly, his fists clenched. It matters to me. Layla grabbed his arm. Kareem, listen, don't make this worse. You can't fight everyone. He turned to her, his expression raw. I can fight for you. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the executive, not the billionaire, but the man she'd once seen sitting alone at that Paris gala, trying to find a reason to care about life. And that's exactly why I fell in love with you, she said softly. But you can't protect me from everything. Kareem exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I can protect your dignity, Layla smiled sadly. My dignity doesn't come from their approval, Kareem. It comes from surviving, from living in truth. He looked at her, proud, defiant, unbroken, and felt something inside him settle. Then we'll face this the same way we've faced everything else. Together. The following morning, Kareem made a decision that would change everything again. He called his former assistant, Amira, and asked her to schedule a press conference, not to defend himself, but to defend her. Layla tried to stop him. Kareem, please, you don't owe them an explanation. He shook his head. I'm not explaining. I'm telling the truth before someone else twists it. The conference was held in the atrium of one of his former company's hotels. The room was packed. Reporters, photographers, and critics from all over the world. Cameras flashed as Kareem walked to the podium, Layla standing silently beside him. He took a deep breath and spoke with a calm, deliberate tone. I've built my life around power and success, he began. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that the greatest measure of a man isn't how much he owns, but how much courage he shows when everything is at stake. The crowd fell silent. This woman beside me, he continued, turning slightly toward Layla, is my wife. She is strong, brave, and honest in ways most of us will never understand. She trusted me with her truth, and instead of honoring that, the world chose to weaponize it. His voice grew firmer. To those who mock her, or anyone who dares to live authentically, know this. You are not exposing shame. You are exposing your own fear. Cameras clicked wildly. Layla's eyes filled with tears. Kareem placed a hand over his heart. If my legacy ends today, let it end for something that matters. I would rather lose every empire I've built than lose the only person who ever made me feel human. He stepped back, refusing to take questions. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, back at the villa, Layla sat in the garden under the stars. When Karim joined her, she said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." He sat beside her. "Yes, I did." She smiled faintly. "You realize the world will never see us the same way again?" He took her hand. "Then let them see us for who we are, not what they expect." She leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You've lost everything, Karim." He looked down at her with a gentle smile. "No," he said softly. "I've found everything that matters." Above them, the desert sky shimmered with countless stars, distant, eternal, untouchable, much like the love they had fought to protect.